Hello, my dears. Today we are talking about deers. Not so much in a biological sense. We'll focus on Bronze Age mythology. We'll also spend quite a bit of time talking about Older Norse mythology and the poetic Edda, with a touch of Greek, Roman, and Celtic in the mix. Story time with Santis. As you might have come to realize, I like petroglyphs. Or rather, I love Bronze Age petroglyphs. Especially those from southern Scandinavia, primarily those from Bohuslän, Sweden, and Østfold, Norway, well in the upland region of Sweden. And of course I wouldn't scoff at any other panel in any other area or any other country. Basically, I like petroglyphs, but I have my favorites. A fairly common and admired figure that one becomes acquainted with while visiting a lot of rock art panels is the deer, a figure that is very prominent in mythologies all over Europe. Some archaeologists argue that there is a symbolic meaning to the deer's ability to shed their horns during the fall, and come spring, they'll have new ones. Just like a snake can shed its skin, the activity could be seen as a suiting metaphor for rebirth, starting anew. Much like with the snake, there seems to be a duality in the interpretation of the deer. As I said, it can represent life and rebirth. It can also act as a messenger between gods and humans, a link between worlds. And the deer was, of course, also a prey animal. But Norse stories also suggest that they could pose a threat. In the Ballad of Grimnir, in the poetic Edda, one can read of the hardships of the world tree Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil ash, hardships suffers, greater than men know of. A heart bites it above, and in its side it rots. Nidhogg beneath tears it. In this passage, the stag becomes something threatening, a hardship. In another verse from the same text, the stag multiplies into stags. Hearts there are also 4, which from its summits arch-necked gnaw. Each mouthful, every nip of the stag's teeth, harms the tree, and therefore all things living. Some scholars even suggest that the 4 stags are meant to represent the 4 elements, or 4 strong winds, natural forces that tear at the world and threaten its harm. But also, in the same text, it is said that the dew gathering on the horns of the stags drip down onto the earth and provides it with new sources of fresh water. And fresh water is, as we know, essential for us to live. Without fresh water, us humans would not survive. So the stags both give and take. While reading the works of esteemed and accomplished rock art experts, it is often the stag's role as a symbol for life and fertility, as a messenger and a link between the gods and humans, that is most cited. The possible reason and background for that we'll discuss after this week's story. This is, after all, story time with Santis. As always, I've taken quite a creative liberties, this time more so than ever, as there is no pre-existing myth or saga behind my story. It's an amalgamation of various pieces of information and interpretations. So without much further ado, enjoy. The wisdom of the stag. On an early foggy morning, nearly night, a young woman, accompanied by a small party, travelled on a narrow road. There was a strangeness to the morning. The air had stood eerily still since the night before. Heavy grey clouds hung in the sky, perfectly blending with the heavy fog covering the landscape. An ominous feeling scented the air with an earthy, metallic fragrance. The fog turned the world into a never-ending slate of grey, sky and path merging without seams. One wrong step, and it would be easy to get dreadfully lost. Despite a creeping feeling of unease that the weather had set, this was also a day of hope, of promise and celebration. This was the day of a marriage, and not just any marriage, a marriage of great significance and importance, one that would strengthen alliances, bring new knowledge, and keep important traditions going. It was a marriage that set the faith of a great many people, a affair of social, economical, and religious significance. So there was no time to waste. It was commonly believed that those skilled in crafts stood close to the divine. The smiths, crafters, and artisans made up one of the structural pillars of society and its prosperity, of power and renown. Together with the warriors, religious leaders, and chieftains, they carried the well-being of the entire community. They were the guardians of culture and influence. But the woman also knew that with power and influence came danger. Falling from grace would mean more than a loss of pride. It was a well-kept secret that times had been rough for the young woman's kin. Though skilled in various crafts, they had struggled. This marriage would change all that. Her lineage, her ancestors, and her family's skill would enrich her new clan. But her intended husband's actual riches would certainly help her birth village, as the fields had stood barren and the coffers now echoed empty. She also had reasons of her own to feel the need to haste on her journey, for she was with child. Her intended was the father, so for that she felt no shame. But after their marriage, that child would be born to power and privilege, the firstborn of a chosen couple, a symbol of the vitality and fortune of both clans. For chosen they were, not just for the sake of their own families, but as a representation of the ancient gods and their ancestors' rituals. They would be the union that connected the gods and the mundane. Their marriage was a sacred tradition, a holy ritual, and a grand celebration for people of all creeds. They would stand in for the god and goddess of fertility in a hero's gamos, a sacred marriage. As the young woman mused, a strong wind sang, and the leaves of the trees trembled. A rustling and a snap was heard, as if the leaves were ripped from their branches by invisible teeth. The wind went as quickly as it came, but a sudden noise was enough to startle the young woman and awaken her from her own thoughts. She had been so lost in her own musings that she had failed to keep up with her surroundings. She did not know where they were or how far they had gone. Her body had acted on its own, gone through the motions, trusting her party to lead her right. She scolded herself. Traveling was never without a risk, especially now. Her arrival was common knowledge, and the importance and heavy symbolism of the ritual were equally known. Now was not a time to be idle. As if the very world wanted to teach her a lesson, a new rustling was heard, then a snarl. A blink of an eye later, a sharp cry of pain was heard. "It bit me," a male voice roared. "Quick, there's more of them," said another. "Watch out for the claws," gasped a third. "I can't see a thing," said a fourth. The woman felt a pull on her arm, urging her to move. The heavy scent of blood and wet fur filled her nose. In an instant, fear, sorrow, and anger gripped her. Fear for her own and her child's life, sorrow over promises that might never be filled, and anger over potential lost. Clutching her still flat stomach, she began a prayer. Her child must live. She thought of her family, the people of her village, and the future that could be. Her life would not end here. Her eyes darted around, looking for something, if not salvation, at least something that would give her a direction. Instead, it was her ears that first made her aware of a twist in fate. A ghostly barking noise penetrated her ear. Then, a sound as if a small stampede of dainty hoofs cut between her and the attacking beasts, breaking the aggressor's focus. Then a new bark, and something flashed up in the sky. It wasn't lightning, but a single white shadow slowly rising amid the grey clouds. As it rose, the fog seemed to clear into a thin mist. As the fog lifted, the preying beasts lost their advantage. With a frustrated snarl and a complaining moan, they retreated. With her eyes transfixed on the figure in the sky, the woman set a pace, shouting a quick "this way" with such confidence that no one thought to question the decision. The party followed their sky-bound savior onto a new stone-marked path. After just a few hundred meters of walking along it, they heard voices and the sound of a horn. It was the woman's intended and his followers, waiting in welcome, prepared to lead the newcomers into the village. After a quick bath, a change of clothes, a new braid in her hair, she was covered in the finest of jewelry, shimmering in the warm tones of the sun itself. The ritual could begin. After the ceremony, a grand feast took place. Fires were lit, music was played, and many a drink was had. The women danced in a near-frenzied euphoria to the sound of beating drums. Their swaying hips made the metallic hangings of their skirts ring over land and water. A true celebration of life and its many blessings. The party seemed to last forever. The participants lost all sense of time. But end it did, and just before the woman closed her eyes for the night, she swore that she could hear a soft barking and a distant sound of tiny hoofs landing on wood. In her dreams, she saw a proud stag wearing its antlers like a crown. The stag looked at her, and then it began to run. As it ran, the scenery changed around it, from summer to fall. The antlers started to look worn and sad, and then they fell. Next came winter, yet the deer seemed unfazed, and it kept its run. Then the scenery changed again, and slowly new horns seemed to form on the deer's head, as spring began to spring around it. A new set adorned the head of the deer. New horns, seemingly more spectacular than the first. Hope and certainty blossomed in her chest when she woke to the following day. In her heart she felt, for all life there is resurrection, a rebirth after a period of darkness. On the surface of the bare rock by the gulf, people of the nearby villages had gathered for generations. On the rock's surface, hundreds of pictures had been carefully pegged. How old they were, no one really knew, but they did know that they had been there for a long time. All of them telling of important events and life lessons, information so valuable that it needed to transcend the test of time and be seen by the masses. It was that same panel that had brought forward her own marriage, for pecked into the granite was the image of a bridal couple, locked in an embrace. The presence of the image preserved the ancestors' rituals, kept it in people's memory, and made it so that future generations knew what needed to be done. The woman thought her own lesson so valuable that she decided to call for the two most proficient craftsmen in the village. From them, she commissioned 2 pieces. From the smith, a bronze amulet. From the artist, a new image to be added onto the rock's surface, both in the shape of a stag. And with the new picture, the message spread, and soon more and more stags appeared on the panels, far and wide. The stag became a representation of the change of seasons, of fertility and birth, of strength and perseverance, a protector and an ally, a symbol of life. So why is it that scholars seem to deem the deer as such an essential figure, both in pre- and historic culture? Well, though present in older rock art traditions as well, deers became a common feature in Scandinavian rock art during the younger part of the Scandinavian Bronze Age. It is not only prehistoric Scandinavia that seems to have taken a liking to the deer. It is also well established in both Celtic, Roman, and Greek mythology, just to name a few. As there was no written language in Scandinavia at the time, when it comes to Bronze Age culture, we are left with a massive puzzle and a fair bit of qualified guessing. But perhaps most often, scholars drew parallels to Cernunnos, the Celtic god of fertility. But perhaps most often, scholars draw parallels to Cernunnos, the Celtic fertility god, who is often depicted with antlers on his head. Cernunnos is associated with not just stags, but a myriad of figures, often seen and depicted in Scandinavian rock art, such as horned serpents, dogs, and bulls. Horns, or antlers in general, are a strong theme in Bronze Age imagery, and horned gods exist as both rock art and bronze figurines. So it is not a stretch to see why a comparison is tempting. Deers can be pegged as individual figures or as part of a herd. Sometimes they are featured in scenes with dogs and humans, often interpreted as hunting scenes. More spectacular sights, like Masleberg in Bohuslän, feature scenes where the deer could be construed as a replacement for the sun horse, a motif that we discussed during the last 2 episodes. At Masleberg, one deer is standing on board a ship, its antlers sprouting into a massive sun with prominent rays. It's absolutely striking to behold, and further cement the deer's specialness, or at least its duality, as something of both the earth and the other world, both mundane and magical. To further strengthen the claim that there is something supernatural about the depiction of deers, let's examine Diana and her Greek counterpart, Artemis, 2 female goddesses that are often depicted accompanied by a deer. And as Diana sort of inherited Artemis' backstory and lore, let's keep it simple and just say Diana. Diana was the goddess of wilderness and hunting, the patroness of the countryside and wildlife, as well as of women, especially during childbirth. There is a myth where Diana cursed a hunter after he watched her bathe. Diana was chaste and modest, and did not take kindly to being seen naked by a stranger. So either by accident or by will, she caused the hunter to transform into a deer. During the transformation, the hunter fled in fear, but he was later chased down by his own dogs and torn apart. Well, Diana isn't the only female linked to deers and vengeance. If we leave Europe for a moment and explore Native American mythology, the myth of the deer lady, or the deer woman, seems quite familiar. She is described as a beautiful woman, but she walks on deer hooves instead of human feet. She shares the same duality that seems to be a bit of a constant. She is a protector of women and children, but can be vengeful, even brutal, to those who are violent or abusive towards them. She is capable of great goodness, but also harm and punishment, further proving that a deer is not always deer. But if you seek something more comforting, perhaps the story of St. Giles and the Hind might be more up your alley. St. Giles was a 6th century monk, a vegetarian and a hermit, his sole companion being his beloved deer, a trusty friend that kept him company and sustained him with fresh milk. During the medieval period, the white stag became a prominent figure, with white being associated as the color of innocent and purity. This further suggests that the deer, at least at that period, served as more of a friend than a foe. Now, the question is, what do you think? Hero or antagonist? Mundane or divine? Or like most creatures on this green earth, a mix of both? Before we end this episode, I would like to make a little bit of a disclaimer, or at least open up for a little discussion. In the past, I've said that we should be careful when using the Eddas as a tool to understand either Bronze Age or Iron Age mythology, and I stand by that, as do most scholars. Though they are believed to be the written accounts of an oral history or an oral tradition of storytelling, they are sure to have been altered and adapted. For that is the nature of oral traditions. They change from region to region, from generation to generation. The story may be the same at its core, but we always adapt them for them to make sense for us. Also, so little is known regarding the circumstance, regarding the popularization of the text, that they make for a sketchy source. It tells of a medieval perception of the past, much more than of the actual past. Another worthy disclaimer is of course that both the Bronze Age and the Iron Age spanned over long periods. There was not one and true Bronze Age culture, or one singular Iron Age culture. Culture is organic and changing. There can be a core, a red thread to follow. But we are evolving as a species. Every era, every landscape, country or village comprises of a collection of a myriad of cultural beliefs and expressions. But with that said, I would like to get back to the fact that talking about the past is like laying a giant puzzle, or trying to solve a cold case with no living eyewitnesses. I have taken quite a liking to a field, or rather a method of study, called ethnoarchaeology, which is a study of the social organization and other ethnology, meaning human expression, of present-day societies based on their material culture, text, items, tool, and try to draw conclusions about past societies from the remains. Ethnoarchaeology is why I myself decided to train both in archaeology and ethnology and receive a diploma in both. It is my belief that we can use later cultures, which we know more of, to try and understand older, now extinct ones. This study offers us a starting block, something that gets us thinking. It's a way to form new theories, explore them further, and adequately test them. They give us a direction, if not the exact destination. If I were to share only what I know for a fact regarding deers and Bronze Age petroglyphs, it would make for short listening. They are quite numerous and appear on many panels. They are evident in both the northern and southern tradition of Scandinavian rock arts. On a few occasions, they can be seen together with human figures and dogs, or standing on board ships. Sometimes they have horns, and other times they do not. The end. But by taking tidbits from various sources, like established theories of Bronze Age cosmology and religion, together with research on rock art and rock art chronology, and trying to fill in the gaps using Old Norse as well as other European sagas, poems, and ballads, we can achieve some sort of depth. For me, it gives me something that I can present and have discussed. In short, comparing and piecing together does not give us a universal truth, but it gives us something to talk about. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see you in the next one.